Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, episode 222, an interview with Eleanor and Litsa from the What's Your Grief podcast.
Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, the only podcast that offers a proven process to help you work through your grief, to grow, evolve, and create a future you can truly look forward to. Here's your host, Master Certified Life Coach, Grief Expert, Widow, and Mom, Krista St-Germain.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the podcast. So I've already done this interview, and I'm just going to tell you now, you definitely want to listen to it because there is so much good stuff packed in about 50 minutes of a conversation with these two women. I first somehow, I don't know, in my grief haze, stumbled onto their podcast in the early days after losing Hugo. Thank goodness, because between their podcast and I would say the Dougie Center's Grief Out Loud podcast, those were the two that I could really relate to that weren't using cliches and weren't telling me to be strong or be grateful or weren't talking about the 5 stages of grief, but they actually had accurate, useful, relatable information about grief. Now, Eleanor and Litsa are not widows. They just know a lot about grief. And I really wanted to have them on the podcast because I knew we would have a conversation that would be helpful for you. So I hope you really, really love it. And before we get into it, I want to tell you about something we're doing that's coming up in September. And you can go ahead and register for it now. It's called Mementos and Memories, and it will be a 3-day online event to help you deal with your person's stuff. I know a lot of us are still struggling with our person's stuff. Maybe your person died recently. Maybe it's been years since they died, but there's stuff that you're holding on to that you're struggling with. And I decided it would be a fun thing to do just a 3-day free online event where I will teach for 3 days. It'll be very succinct, so it'll be good for busy schedules. I'll go live 3 times. Don't worry about it if you can't make it live. You can catch the replay later, not a problem. I will have worksheets for each day. It will be information on how to deal with your person's stuff in a way that's easier, because I know it's not easy and I want to make it easier. So you can go to coachingwithkrista.com/mementos and memories. coachingwithkrista.com/mementos and memories. You'll see all the information. There's a totally free version. If you want to upgrade, I always offer a little VIP fun thing that you can add on if you want. Totally don't have to. It's going to be really powerful, quick, good for busy schedules. And hopefully it will make a topic that's super hard just a lot easier. So coachingwithkrista.com/mementos and memories. All right. And with that, let's get into my interview with Eleanor and Litsa. I hope you love it. Welcome, Eleanor and Litsa, to the podcast. I have to tell you before we start, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves, but I have to tell you, because you don't know this yet, because we just met, that when my husband died in 2016, wow, I'm in a time warp, 2016, your podcast was really, really helpful to me. And I know that podcasting isn't your main gig. I know you do so many other things, but I just want to tell you, like, at a time where I didn't know anything really about grief, except I thought there was something about 5 stages. Like, it really, really helped me. So it's exciting to me to have you here. I think we're going to have a super valuable conversation, but I just want to start it by just saying thank you for the work that you do and let you know that it had a really powerful impact on me.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice to hear. I think because we, podcasting, has definitely never been our primary thing, and we've never dedicated a lot of time to it. We know that our podcast isn't always technologically and sound-wise as great as a lot of other podcasts. So we're like, should we even leave this out in the universe? So it's nice to hear when it's actually been helpful for people.
Yeah, I think yours and about one other podcast didn't make me want to barf, crawl in a hole. Like, it was actually really helpful. So yeah. Okay, well, let me throw you the ball and just let you introduce yourself. So tell my listeners who you are, what you do, all the things that you want them to know about you.
Oh gosh.
I know, right?
Well,
hobbies, all the things. Passwords, usernames.
I'm Eleanor. and I am one half of What's Your Grief, and Litsa is here as well.
I'm the other half.
Yes. My background's in counseling psychology. Litsa's background is in social work. So we actually met as professionals working in the field of grief and bereavement, trying to support people at the time of a loved one's sudden and unexpected death most often. And we were also working with these same people, oftentimes for about 2 years afterwards. And this was all throughout the state of Maryland. So we were supporting people experiencing all different types of loss from all different backgrounds and at all different stages in their grief. And when I say stages, I don't mean stages of grief like across, I just mean at different points in their grief, because grief obviously changes and evolves as we move through it. And so we had kind of a big challenge there. Oftentimes we were not able to be face to face with people. So we were trying to support them remotely through things like referrals, online resources, print resources, and things like that. So that was one piece of it. And then I'll also share that we both experienced the death of a parent in early adulthood. So that was another big piece of our basically what informed our work. So we were kind of looking at things always through two lenses, the professional lens and then the personal lens. And so this was about 10 years ago. And fortunately, the landscape of grief support has gotten so much better when it comes to online resources, virtual resources, podcasts, things like that. But at the time, it was actually pretty sparse. So I think Litsa and I, for a long time, would look at what was out there and said, nope, we would never have used this in our grief. The way they're talking about grief just feels so non-relatable to us. It feels not very comprehensive, a little bit overgeneralized. And we really just wanted to find resources that explained grief and talked about grief the way that we wanted to talk about it. And so back in 2012, we started our website, What's Your Grief? And it just started as us writing articles, like really long form type of articles about different aspects of the grief experience for all different types of loss. And then also a lot of articles just about life after loss, because what we know is that there's the coping with the grief, and then there's just like living in the world after experiencing loss, which is a mix of a lot of different things, stressors and changes and things like that. And so we started there, and we've just kind of branched out from there because we are often seeing other gaps that we're trying to fill. Like you said, we have a podcast, we have some active social media communities, we have some more private communities for grieving people, as well as for people who are grief professionals. We have a book that we just published in September, creative initiatives, online courses, print resources, all sorts of different things. So it's really grown from there. And our guiding principle has usually been like, what doesn't exist and how can we fill those gaps? So that's basically like our background in a nutshell and where we have come to today.
I love it. Litsa, anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that covers the big bulk of it. I think, the only thing I might add is that one of the things that was really unique about the job where we met is a lot of grief support that exists out there, and programs that run and places where people work. It's based on this premise of people reaching out for support. So all of a sudden, the people you're working with are sort of self-selecting. They're there because they followed you on social media and they wanted grief support. They came to your center, they called, there's some way that they've reached out. And we had this sort of really odd, I think, experience of meeting people at the hospital at the time of the death, often being in that meeting where people would find out that their family member had died and it was unexpected. And we were kind of just like assigned, for lack of a better word, to be there with them for that period of a couple of years afterwards. And so I think, when I think about the things that informed our work, I think a lot of it was informed as well by what grief support looks like for people who aren't interested in grief support, because that was a big part of the people. There were some people who absolutely wanted exactly what our program had to offer and wanted to take advantage of everything and loved the ideas of, memorialization and counseling and groups and, all of this stuff. And then there were other people who were just like, what, why are you? No. And I think for us, we were people who in our own losses, traditional grief support was not whatever worked was helped us either.
Mhm.
So I think like I really related to those people because I was like, oh, right, I would have been not interested in
Yeah.
what you're offering. So I think that has always shaped a lot of the work that we do.
Yeah. I definitely want to come back to that too. I would love to know later, like what did help you. So why did you even get into grief work in the first place?
Kind of funny story. People ask us this because I think we see so many people in doing this work, but whether it's in a volunteer capacity or actually in a professional capacity where it's their career. And we see so many people who got into this work because they had a loss.
Mhm.
They spent, time processing the loss, grieving that loss, and after some time said, I want to get into this work. Because I find great purpose in it. I find great meaning in it. Maybe they had a grief professional in their life who really helped them in a way that inspired them to get into the work. So I think people often assume that's how we got into this work, but I think we both agree it was a little more just sort of coincidental that we ended up doing what we're doing. I was fresh out of my master's program and wanted to get into the workforce. I needed to get into the workforce. And I was really just applying on like monster.com. I don't know if that's still a thing that people use.
I don't either.
I was just applying for jobs and I ended up at the job that Litsa and I met in. And 2 weeks after that was when my mom died. So I was in the work right around the time my mom died. So it was really coincidental for me. And Litsa, I think you agree, like it was sort of the same for you in a way.
Yeah, it was sort of similar for me. I was 18 when my dad died, and I certainly that was not something where I thought, oh, I'm going to get into grief. Like I went a very different direction, and my undergraduate and my first master's degree had absolutely nothing to do with grief and mental health. I was going in a very different direction. And thought I would kind of end up in academia. Maybe my undergraduate degrees were in philosophy and my first master's was in philosophy. And actually doing that work, I just sort of felt really detached from people. I was in a world that was a lot of writing and reading and thinking about the big questions of life, things that actually I think really do relate to a lot of what I do now in grief, like the big existential questions. And it actually helped me tremendously in my grief. I always say like my grief support was being a philosophy major. And that was huge for me, but I didn't have any vision of doing this. And I really just, when I decided I wanted to get out of the track that I was on, I knew I wanted to just like be doing things with real people in the world again. I moved back to Baltimore where I'm from, and I started working in homeless services. And I just had jobs that were sort of in kind of social service related work. I worked with kids who were in the foster care, teenagers in the foster care system. And then for a long time in homeless services. And that's when I went back to graduate school and didn't have a thought then that grief was going to be it, though I was very tuned into loss. I think through foster care and like the foster system is just so much loss, and homeless services, it's just so much loss, not necessarily bereavement, but other types of grief. And I knew I loved that sort of work. And then it was when I got out, it was a similar thing to Eleanor. I was not like, okay, let me find a grief job. I was like, well, my homeless services job is not going to pay me enough to pay off these student loans. So now I need to start looking for other things. So I knew I wanted to kind of be in that space, but I wasn't exactly sure. And then it was really getting, I had minimal graduate coursework in grief. Like I had a little bit, but not much. But then saw this job that really sounded like a good fit. And that's where we met.
I will say, I think we sound rather perhaps uninspired, but I will say, I think that our own losses are why we started What's Your Grief. So it's not why we got into the field, but it's a big part of why we started What's Your Grief. Like I said, we had that kind of lens that we were looking at things through. And because of our own experiences, we knew that existing grief support sort of fell short for a lot of people like us. And so I do think that's why we started What's Your Grief, and probably why we've stayed in the work as long as we have. I think Litsa and I were both people who like a new fresh project and challenge, but I think that because of our experiences, we've been able to stay in this work and grow What's Your Grief in the way that we have. So
yeah. Agree.
It is interesting how everybody comes to this kind of work so differently. Like I kind of came into it reluctantly. Like I thought life coaching was amazing after my husband died, but I didn't want to work with widows because I thought it would be too sad.
Mm-hmm.
I had to do a lot of work before, kind of finally decided, oh no, actually this is the work that I want to do. So
Yeah. Yeah, it is
I'm,
interesting. I think it evolves,
yeah, yeah. And now I can't imagine doing anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And people ask, like, isn't it heavy? Like, no, it doesn't. It actually feels to me, for me, it's not that it's wrong if it is heavy, but for me, it feels invigorating and purposeful. And I love it.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think the thing about working with folks when they're grieving, especially, when we're not talking about other severe mental health stuff that is happening alongside grief, like oftentimes it is really incredible to be able to work with people and connect in their lives in such an incredibly low moment and then be able to really work with people. Then I think it can feel really inspiring and invigorating because you do know that you're kind of on that path with people that sometimes feels like there is only one way to go from here. And so I do think people underestimate that when they hear what kind of work people do when they work in grief. They think, like, oh, it must be all like
how
awful.
do you do that?
When there's so much more that's going on.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, because everybody seems to have a different answer to this, but how do you define grief? Like, what's your definition of it? And I wonder how it's changed for you over time. I know it's like a big question.
Well, this is something that we talk about all the time. Yeah. And we've written an article that specifically is titled, "What's Your Grief's Definition of Grief?" And I definitely cannot recite to you off the top of my head what that definition is. But if I had to summarize it, I think that it is an experience that is not just emotion. It's not just like sadness or anger. It's an experience that includes emotion. And when it includes emotion, it includes emotion of all kinds, right? It includes emotions that are distressing and sad and painful. But also, I think over time, especially, it starts to include some emotions that can feel a little more warm and positive. So it's that, but it's also our cognitive experience. So it's our thoughts, it's how we perceive our experiences, it's how we think about our past, our present, and our future. It can be a very physical experience, and it's an experience that really impacts our worldview and how we think about ourselves, people, and the world. And so it's this big, all-encompassing experience. And the other thing that we're always really careful to add, I think we sort of hinted at this a little bit when we were explaining what we do, is that it is very much focused on the loss and focused on the grief, but at the same time, it also is about all those other things that change and adjust and happen as a result of that loss. So it's about the domino of secondary losses that happen. So when we ask people to think about the loss they've experienced, we ask them to think beyond that primary loss to all those secondary losses as well, because that is everything that's going on for you in this moment.
And losses that they probably can't even comprehend yet because they haven't happened.
Well, right. Like we've talked about this a lot. Like I don't know how far out you are, Litsa. I'm well over 10 years out from the death of my mother, and I'm still stumbling over new secondary losses. So you're exactly right about that. But it's also all those secondary things. It's just being able to find a way to live in a world without a person who maybe was very important to you, or in a world that feels very different and changed and altered. So I don't know, Litsa, what am I missing? Is there anything you would add?
No, that is the longest definition of grief I've ever heard, but it covers a lot. I mean, I think, because that's the thing. I think it's like people want, like, we want to explain it. Like, I think usually like in the one sentence definition, I'm like, it's a normal human natural response to loss. Like, that's it. And it's just that normal natural human response, like what those responses are, is all the things Eleanor just said. Like, there's so much in there that it sounds really simple to say that it's these the reaction or response, but those responses are in every domain of our lives, and it's not. And so I think that's why it just always feels insufficient. And I think it is a learning. I mean, I think a huge piece of grief, and the way I think we both conceptualize grief, is that it is this evolving learning process of learning to live in the world where someone we love is gone. And that is something that goes on forever in some way. And that we can be kind of an active part of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that, oh, sorry, I was just going to add like that. I really want to highlight what Lisa said about that, just human response, right? Because it's something that is incredibly unique to us and our experience and our loss and our relationship with who or what we've lost. But it is also just a human experience that humans have been experiencing since the beginning of time. And so it's scary and it's overwhelming and it's frightening, but it is knowable. It is human. It is something that we can learn to live alongside and to integrate and to cope with. It still sucks, but it is human.
Yeah. Yeah, we're definitely on the same page in terms of how I describe it too. I am interested sometimes in conversations that I have with people who do think that, when you're talking about grief, they're kind of considering grief as only an emotion, as opposed to the way, Eleanor, you described it, right? Which, and how I see it is like an umbrella term for the whole experience, all the thoughts, all the feelings, all the natural ways that we respond to a perceived loss. And the lens that I'm working through, of course, is spousal loss, partner loss, but like, that's not just loss. Like there's all kinds of losses. And I think sometimes people make the assumption that it's just death only.
Oh yeah. I think we spend a lot of time talking about non-death loss because it has been for different reasons. I mean, obviously, as I shared, my early professional work was with a lot of people who were grieving losses that weren't death. And for me, after my dad died, my sister really soon after developed a really severe heroin addiction, and that went on for many years. And she's thankfully okay now. But her partner, who was like a part of our family, died of an overdose. But it really made me so aware of the grieving that we do when we are grieving people who are still alive, and people who, you can have someone in your family with a substance use disorder and feel so much loss and grief around who that person was before the substance, or, who they are when they're not using. And I think oftentimes that gets missed. And I know, Eleanor as well, I think we've both just had this combination of personal and professional experiences with non-death loss. So it's always been really important for us to spend time with that, because I think many people miss it. And sometimes it's non-death losses that are secondary, like Eleanor said, to the death. Like sometimes that creates these other, these relationships where suddenly the person's family who we thought we'd stay close with forever is not close with us anymore, or friends ghost us or whatever. So, there's so many reasons it's all tied together.
How has the way you define it or think about it changed?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. It's so hard to think back. It's like, oh my God, this is such a dumb analogy, but like, I think about like with my kids, like I remember like they were so wonderful and adorable and great when they were like little ones, but I can't actually remember what that was. Like, I can't remember like their voice or things like that. And these things get overwritten. And I feel like over time, as our conceptualization has evolved, it's just kind of gotten overwritten a little bit. And I don't really even know where we started. I think that we definitely have come to a place where we really want, like I had just said, and Litsa had said, like, want to emphasize that it is just this normal and human experience. I think especially as society starts to move towards a pathologizing of grief, our pendulum is swinging in the other direction to be like let's slow our roll here a little bit and look at, what grief actually is, and, the very wide range of what is very normal and very human, and what the differences are between different groups of people and cultures and all sorts of things. So I think that maybe some of our conceptualization has evolved because society has evolved. Would you agree with that, Litsa? Or
yeah, no, I think that that's probably true. Maybe you're right that we have, maybe I'm just not remembering. I honestly, this makes me feel like I'm a really stagnant person to say this. I don't think mine has changed that much. Like I even think about grief going back to my childhood. Like I was raised, my mom is Greek. And culturally, Greek people have a very different relationship with death and grief, I think, than some of maybe Western American culture in just the fact that there is ongoing memorialized. I mean, you remember, I mean, even in formal ways, like even in church and religious ceremonies for the Greek Orthodox, you have a memorial every year forever after someone dies. Like in church every week when you're a kid, you hear them read out the names of people who died 50 years ago and people whose families have brought in who have done the flowers that week in the church because of that. It's an always remembering thing. And so I think for me, I didn't have some of those ideas that like, oh, grief is this, finite period of time and we do this emotional thing and then it ends. I think I was raised with a little bit of a different idea. So yeah, but I do think you're right. I think we have moved more probably because of the pathologizing to really wanting to focus on the risks of pathologizing grief and how that undoes certain things that we've, I think, worked really hard to change over the last 50 years.
Might get some insurance payments, but otherwise not.
Right. And when you look at the number of insurance payments, like literally it is, if we're saying that only 10% of people probably meet criteria for prolonged grief disorder, and 80% of those people have a co-occurring diagnosis. So they already had a diagnosis they could bill insurance for. We're talking about, this might like it comes out to like maybe 3% of people grieving who this is would make a difference for. And those would then have to be people who were, worried about insurance to begin with. So I think there's just that. I think that argument is one of the ones that really is like, we can't create diagnoses for an insurance system.
I think also having personal experiences, I guess I was initially thinking just from a professional perspective, but Litsa, you mentioned just kind of the personal perspective. And thinking back about that, I do think also like understanding just the wide variety of approaches to understanding and coping with grief and conceptualizing the role that grief plays in your life after loss. I think that's a big one that changed for me. Because honestly, it wasn't that I was like grief and loss averse. I just didn't really think about it until I experienced it. I just took like what I heard sort of secondhand for granted as being true. And I think that's what a lot of people do. And then when I was actually in it, I was like, oh, wait, no, that's not at all. Like, I really don't even know the first thing. So I do think it naturally just evolved because of that. And then as we get older too, like Litsa and I have talked about this a lot, just like as we get older, we start to like kind of accumulate more and more losses that we've experienced in life. And I think the more we understand, I think whereas when we were maybe in our 20s, we were like, oh, this is a tough time, we push through and move forward from, I think now we're kind of understanding like life just becomes this mixed bag of like really wonderful, amazing, great things and things that are sad and that we lose and that we are never going to really get back in the way that we had them at one point. And I think it's kind of just shifted to this like acceptance that that's what life is. You sort of kind of just, it sounds sad, but it's not, I don't think. But yeah, I think that's.
Well, yeah, I love that because the push through, move forward mentality kind of always assumes the grass is going to be greener and you're going to get somewhere that's better than where you are. But then you realize, oh no, wait, the truth of life, at least is how I see it, is like, can I be with myself in the present moment?
Yeah.
And sometimes the present moment feels amazing and sometimes it really sucks.
Yeah. And that's
but can I not abandon myself as I'm in it?
Yeah. And can I, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, or feel like I need to change this. Like this feeling bad feels wrong, or feeling bad is wrong. We need to move forward from this, or this means that I haven't grieved right, or I haven't processed right. Like, no, it just means that like life is bittersweet. It's a mix of happy and sad. It's a mix of up and down. And it's okay for those tough times to exist. It's okay for them to happen. It's okay to even just sit with them at times without trying to change them. And I do think that's something that losing someone you really love teaches you, is like, well, wait a minute, I don't really actually want to let go of all of this sadness necessarily. Like that kind of ache, it reminds me of something very precious to me. And it's not that I want to stay in acute pain forever, because that would be unmanageable. But it's that it's like that ache that kind of happens on a rainy day, right? Like those things that bubble up at times.
Yeah.
I don't want to get rid of that, really.
Same. Sometimes I teach a lot of, thoughts, cause, feel, like cognitive behavioral approaches. And I think what a lot of times people hear is, oh, I'm supposed to think in a way that feels good. Right. Like, oh, I'm supposed to think positive. But I love what you said, because that's exactly what I think it is too, which is no, like, can I just think intentionally about the loss? And sometimes I want to miss him.
Yes,
I want to feel that. It would be, I don't want anybody to be able to take that from me.
And I mean, I think that's the reason that I won't speak for Eleanor too, but I'll kind of speak for Eleanor, is I think that why we lean more towards acceptance and commitment therapy than cognitive behavioral therapy is because I think acceptance and commitment therapy starts from that place of saying what we're working on is not changing the thoughts and feelings. It's about accepting them and learning to be with them. And in that comes change, because we're able to connect to our values differently and connect to ourselves differently and be in the present moment. And that there's something that's really amazing in that. And I think that for me, especially, I mean, I think cognitive behavioral therapy has its absolute places and works in certain ways, but I think for grief, one of the things that I've always really appreciated about ACT as a cognitive approach is that it embraces that idea that no, that's the work we're doing is just being with ourselves. And that sometimes feels wonderful and it sometimes doesn't feel great.
Yeah. And I have to use the word training instead of therapy because we're not therapists, but I'm with you. And I love the idea that we don't even have to change our thinking as much as we have to like separate ourselves from it and notice, okay, is this thought moving me toward what I want or away from what I want?
Yeah.
And sometimes what is moving me toward what I want is something that makes me feel quote unquote negative, right? Like as though that's a thing, but that's still my intentional choice. And that doesn't mean anything about how I'm doing, or like, it's just a choice I get to make as a human on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I can feel those things and think those things, and I can still do things in the world that mean things to me and that are important to me. And, I think that's oftentimes there's this idea that I actually just like recorded something on our social media about this, about, we feel like we have to be feeling better in order to do certain things. And so we need to be changing our thoughts so that we can get ourselves feeling better. And, that's going to be what changes things. And I really love a lot of the research that's coming out around like inhibitory learning theory and this idea that it's actually not necessarily about changing things so that we get more used to it and then we boost up our emotion, but that actually just we practice doing things even when things feel hard, and that's actually what leads people to sometimes more sustained ongoing change and towards the behaviors they want in the world.
Because it's such an illusion that things aren't going to be hard.
Right.
It's like it's cute and it's nice, but it's not super realistic.
I think that's one of the most important coping skills that we can learn in life and in grief is dialectical thinking and understanding that things are not either or. They're not either easy or hard. They're not either positive or negative. It's many things are a mix of both things. And quite often the thing that feels most comfortable is not the thing that moves you towards your values or your purpose or what you want. Like I just even published an article on our site yesterday about this. Like I am somebody who loves comfort. Like I love blankets. I love being at home in my sweatpants. I love all of that stuff, but I'm also like really bored and really like cut off and lonely sometimes. And the hard thing is putting on clothes and going to a party and driving there. And Lord, I have to figure out parking and possibly have an uncomfortable social interaction or two. That's like the hard thing, but that's actually the thing that's going to move me more towards feeling less lonely and feeling less unstimulated and bored. So often we have to push past that discomfort to ever even get on a path towards things that we think we value. So it is
not because we're motivated or excited.
Sometimes motivation is, I have a phrase for that, but it's not PG, so I'm not going to say it. But yes, I totally agree. I remember the first time I heard my teachers say discomfort is the currency to your dreams. And I was like, and then it was after Hugo died, and I decided like that is it. Everything I want is on the other side of discomfort. And I got myself a bracelet that said discomfort for exactly the same reason, Eleanor, because I want to stay in the blankets and with the stuffed animals, and like it is in my nature to like go in, but everything I wanted was new and of course naturally scary.
Again, it's not either or. Like there is definitely a time and place for comfort. Like there's no way I'm giving that up. But I also need to find a balance where I say like, okay, I can be comfortable when I come home, or okay, I can spend this weekend, you know, laying on the couch watching Netflix. And but I'm also, or not but, we'll use and I'm also going to do this other thing that is hard, but I think would be personally fulfilling. So it's finding that balance of things, I think.
And there's no moral superiority to doing the hard thing either.
No, not at all. And this is the thing, is like, I think we all need to decide for ourselves what is right and what is too much and what is too little and what is the perfect balance. Because I'm an introvert and a homebody. Like my balance is going to be way different than Litsa's, who is more extroverted and likes to get out. Like we all have to decide this for ourselves. But I do think it at some point is helpful to start asking those questions. Now, if you just experienced a loss last week and you are in acute grief, like I would never be like, no, you need to get out of
yourself.
No, it's okay. Like stay under the blankets, like take care of yourself. But at some point, I think we do need to start asking ourselves certain questions.
Yeah, because I mean, I do think that acute grief, it's part of that relationship we have with our grief. I think is acute grief in the beginning. It's so intense and overwhelming and devastating and awful that we almost feel like grief is the enemy, because it's so painful, and it does often leave us like on the sofa, immobilized and cocooned up. But I think it's important sometimes to remember like that cocooning of early grief, like that idea that sadness and everything that grief does that does incapacitate us, sometimes like that is us turning inward and figuring out how to spend time with ourselves slowly and methodically and readjust to this world, like without the person. Like, grief it feels like the enemy, I think, early on, but sometimes that cocoon, like in the blankets, is such an important part of grief for many people. I mean, not for everybody. Some people are, right back at it, straight to work. But for some people, I think it's just that it can almost become too comfortable, or at a point you go, wow, I'm really comfortable here, but also I've given up things that really meant so much to me. And now I don't know how to get back to them. And I'm waiting for motivation because I think that that's what I'm supposed to have, or I'm waiting for things to feel better. And sometimes it's going, wait a minute, if I wait to feel better, I might be waiting forever. And it turns out,
dread it and bring the dread along with me as I
totally.
I like to think of it too, like for myself, as through a frame of usefulness, like, what is useful to me? And sometimes it is the cuddling in the blankets. And then sometimes it is doing something that is in service of something else that I want that maybe feels bigger or a little bit scary, but it's never right or wrong or good or bad. It's just what is useful to me, the individual in this place where I am.
Yeah. And when has something become not just a coping tool, but become kind of like a crutch in a way? We do this with avoidance too. Like avoidance is at the heart of so many anxiety disorders and other struggles, right? But it can also be really useful in grief in doses, because we need to take a break from our grief at times. Like, as we often feel like we need to be focusing on our grief 100% of the time, we need to dive in, and we feel guilty if we're not focused on it. But like, no, we need to give ourselves that break from it, because guess what? Grief, it's not like you're going to power through it and then get to a point where it's over. Grief is with you for the long haul. So you have to learn to kind of like oscillate, as the dual process model of grief would say. And so we are all for avoidance and doses. But again, when does it become chronic? When does it become that crutch that is cutting us off from maybe the world, or from the values and purpose and the day-to-day stuff that we need to and want to engage with?
Yeah. And the opposite of that, I think, is also true, which is why the first time I learned about dual process theory, I remember feeling so relieved, because like the A+ perfectionist in me was kind of like, no, I have to do this. I have to be thinking about it. I have to be focused on it. Like if I'm not, I'm doing it wrong. And so being given permission to binge Netflix or do whatever I wanted that was completely unrelated to grief was such a relief.
Well, and it's not just you. Like we had almost a century of grief theory that fell under this grief work hypothesis that essentially did say, like, we need to power on through. We need to focus on it. We need to like battle through that dark, weedy forest until we get to the other side. And so it's kind of ingrained in our society. So it's not just you, it's also what we've been taught and told for so long. And that's why Litsa and I both love the dual process model of grief and coping, and also continuing bonds, because continuing bonds theory says, hey, you know what? Like it's ongoing and we stay connected.
I was going to ask you what your favorite grief theory or theories, if it's a tie. Do you have one?
For me, it's those two.
Those two, yeah.
That came out in the 1990s. The 90s, what a great era, right? I mean, for grief, for everything. Litsa, do you have any others? I think that's it for me, really.
Yeah, no, I think those are definitely my favorite grief theories. Like I said before, I like ACT's just general approach to the world, which is not a grief theory, but just kind of their approach to what we've just been talking about. So yeah, I think those are the things that kind of most guide my practice, along with a little bit of the existential psychotherapy as well. Like that, again, is not grief theory per se, but that really just informs the way that I think we think about a lot of the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Positive psychology as well has a lot of interesting stuff to say about just resilience and grit and post-traumatic growth and things that are relevant to the experience of loss.
Yeah, totally. So a lot of my listeners, well, I mean, not all, but it is called the Widowed Mom Podcast. So, we can make some assumptions. One of their biggest worries is how their children will do over the course of their life, right? Because they've lost a parent. So since both of you have lost a parent, and I know it's not universal and I don't want to make any generalizations, but what are your thoughts on that now? I mean, being given what you do and it being 10 years out for you, Eleanor, I don't remember, Litsa, how long you said.
A lot longer. Like, I was 18. Yeah.
What would you want women who are out there really worried about how their kids are going to do because their other parent died to know?
Well, I think, we were both in early adulthood, so we were young. But I do think from what we know, a lot of kids do say that they feel like this experience has made them stronger, and understand the world maybe a little differently, which at times as a kid, it's not always great to be different in any way. But I think as we grow older, that wisdom is useful. I do think that one of the most important things that I've learned as someone who's grieving a parent, but also a parent, is just the idea of having these open lines of communication and dialogue, so we can touch base and talk about and revisit and share in not just the struggle of grief and what it means to grieve throughout our lifespan, because that is what we do, but also just to have those shared memories and conversations about the person who died. That's like my biggest concern when a young child is impacted by a loss, is that the parent's going to shut down the conversation and stop talking about the loved one. And we know that oftentimes that is what happens, because the New York Life and NACG did a really big survey, Comfort Zone Camp, sorry. I think NACG was involved on some level. If I'm saying this wrong, sorry, but it was a really big survey. And a lot of what respondents did say is that kids stopped talking about the person out of fear of upsetting the parent, and the parent stopped talking about the person out of fear of what was right or wrong for the child. And what results is this culture of silence. And what we know about continued bonds is that many people, not all, do want to have that continued bond. They do want to know who that person was. They do want to have those memories. And so, and even if even if there was more, it was a more troubled relationship, I do think being able to explore that and understand that and have that dialogue is really, really important. So that's, I don't know, that doesn't really answer your question.
No, but I think it's so valuable. And I think like one of the big things that I really like, I'm preaching all the time, is that emotions aren't problems to solve. They're just experiences to allow. And I think what you just described is so built on the idea that emotions are problems. If we didn't think that in the first place, we wouldn't avoid the conversations that we imagined would bring up the uncomfortable emotions, because we didn't see them as problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
I think that's, like such a huge piece for families to start to get comfortable with after loss. And I think the thing that builds that culture of silence, or not sharing memories or doing some of those things, isn't because people don't want to share memories. It's just that they haven't become okay with the fact that sometimes sharing memories means that we're like really happy and really sad at the same time. And like sometimes it means we're telling a story that is like making us laugh and also maybe making us like well up and feel a little teary. And like, that's okay, because none of this is anything that we have to feel that judgment about. And, for kids, it's so important, especially as kids grow up, to kind of evolve their bond with their parent. Like some of the research has shown that when kids have a really, what they call in the research, a stagnant bond, where they sort of only can remember and understand their parent as they understood in their 6-year-old brain or their 8-year-old brain. At that age, you only understand your parent to be this being in the world who is there for you. Like, you don't fully see them as a developed person out in the world doing all these other things. And it's so important for kids and their bond that as they get older, that they get to hear more to fill out the rest of the story that they didn't know, because it's hard for a 25-year-old to connect with whatever their 6-year-old saw about their dad and nothing else. And so it's so important that the other people around them help them to fill that out. And if we don't do that for kids, they're usually not necessarily going to know how to do that themselves, or seek it out, or reach out to their parent's friend or whoever to try to get some of those other stories or those memories, especially when all those years have passed. If it hasn't been normalized, to kind of help them to know that no matter how many years it's been, they're going to have new questions and probably going to want to know new things. And, if they get pregnant and their mom died, they're probably going to be thinking about all sorts of things about their mom differently, that it's going to happen across the lifespan. And that's really normal. So for me, I think being able to help kids early to understand that it's always going to be evolving, that they're going to, the questions are always going to be there. I think the other thing I would say is to know that, those stories, that the conversations about the person who's gone, the memory making and legacy, that I think is so important with kids. And also that I say this maybe thinking about myself and my sister, who were 18 and 12 when our dad died, that like, you're maybe going to be the person they want to talk to. And often, especially for adolescents and teenagers, like you're not going to be their grief support person. And that's not because you're a bad parent or because you're failing or whatever. It's because like adolescents and teenagers are looking to their friends, they're looking to other people, like their parents just aren't often the people, no matter how wonderful you've been, that are going to be able to kind of tap into all of that grief stuff. And so I think being able to help kids to feel supported in their grief, in finding the outlets that are going to work for them, whether that is, outlets through grief camps or grief programs, or just through music or art, or, whatever it is they do, reading, journal, like whatever they do. But I think getting okay with that is also really important, while still being like, I'm here to help you find the things.
Yeah.
And I know you might not even want to talk to me about the things.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad you said that. Yeah. And I think sometimes too, it comes with like releasing the idea that what we think we know is best for them may not be what's best for them. And that can be hard as a parent.
Yeah. Especially I have teenagers right now. And there is a lot of I think just without taking loss out of the picture, there's a lot of loss and struggle in just understanding that they are growing into their own people, who do maybe know what they prefer or what's best for them, maybe even a little more than you do. And so I love Litsa's advice. And I think that a lot of times parents are like, oh, I need to get them into therapy. I need to get them into this like group, and they don't want to go. And we're always like, I think the best thing we can do is offer them those options, make things available, maybe give them a gentle nudge, knowing that no kid really like, well, not no kid, but many kids are going to be like, ew, no, gross, cringe, right? But I think that sometimes if you just kind of give them that gentle nudge, ask them to try it once. If they hate it, they don't have to do it again. They may find it's not as bad as they thought, but also just respecting their autonomy and their judgment in terms of finding those outlets, as long as we believe that they are constructive and healthy outlets and not the opposite.
Yeah. I hate that we're at time. I hate it. Like, I'm only a third through my questions. So I hope you can come back, because I have a lot more I want to talk about. I feel like you're my people. Like, I know you, but you just met me, but you're my people. Okay. So any
we're
parting
talkers.
words? Yeah. Like, well, and I mean, it's exciting. I think people who probably aren't very interested in grief, who are really just interested in like figuring out how to support themselves, but it isn't something that they're curious about and fascinated by because they want to do more of it. They're just like, how do I get through it? Like, I find it exciting to have conversation with other people about grief, which is why I love that you have a professional community too. Yes. It's exciting to be able to connect with other people. So anyway, what is it that we didn't cover? And also, how can people find you?
We try to keep it easy in terms of finding us. We're just What's Your Grief everywhere. It's what'syourgrief.com, but then all the social media, it's just What's Your Grief. Our book is called What's Your Grief. Our podcast is called What's Your Grief. So yeah, those are the places you can find us, is kind of all the usual spots.
I will, because we've talked so much about how we prefer, like how we think it's important to have different types of outlets for people who are coping. I will also add, like, we do a lot of different types of stuff. We have some creative initiatives on our website that we do. We also have, you mentioned that we have a private professional community, but we also have a private community for grieving people that is both asynchronous, where people can just kind of type on a forum, but also where we do a lot of virtual kind of live in-person type of stuff that's both creative and sometimes practical and sometimes just psychoeducation. And so we really do try and offer a lot of that type of stuff. We also have online courses for people who are like, I like to learn, like you are interested in wanting to learn. Like, there's a lot of people like that. And so we have some courses and stuff. So as Litsa said, what'syourgrief.com is our website, and you can find pretty much everything we do there. But just wanted to, for people who are like, oh, that's me, I'm like that outside of the box griever, we do try and have stuff for you.
Yes.
And
for us, because
done some of your online courses, they're so solid. Solid. And your emails are amazing. I just love the work that you do. So thanks so much for coming on and being willing to talk to my listeners. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having us. This was great. It was great to get to chat.
Okay. And come back.
We will definitely come back.
Okay. Thanks again.
Thank you.
If you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and want to create a future you can truly get excited about even after the loss of your spouse, I invite you to join my Mom Goes On coaching program. It's small group coaching just for widowed moms like you, where I'll help you figure out what's holding you back and give you the tools and support you need so you can move forward with confidence. Please don't settle for a new normal that's less than what you deserve. Go to coachingwithkrista.com and click Work With Me for details and next steps. I can't wait to meet you.